Trump's most important qualification in picking his vice president, and that is, will you do what I tell you to do, and not have a contrary opinion like Mike Pence did on January the 6th, 2021.
Mm.
I think this is evidence of this obsession that Trump has with the 2020 election, why he won't let it go, and why that makes him vulnerable if only Biden weren't so unpopular. We obviously don't know the answer. I think the bulk of the combat is going to be underground. I think Hamas has tried to secure itself in this incredible tunnel network that I think was completely unknown to the outside world, that they've spent millions of dollars building. They may try and come out through exits on the surface, and certainly some combat could take place there. It's not a happy situation, but let's be clear who is morally culpable for the danger that Hamas has put its citizens in. It is Hamas. Israel should not, nor should any other country faced with terrorist attack, be subject to a terrorist veto by showing the terrorists are even more brutal than was demonstrated on October the 7th, killing Israelis. They're now brutal enough to kill their own people. Are they to escape because they're simply more brutal than the rest of the world? I don't think so.
So the concerns that have come from not just the White House, but from many, many quarters, not just the United Nations either, but from various leaders and capitals in the world, that the invasion of Rafah could lead to enormous civilian casualties. Do you at all share that concern? And could it be counterproductive? I mean, given the strain that that would put on friendships and alliances around the world, especially maybe including America?
Well, I think the overwhelming population of the United States supports Israel as strongly as before. I think where the fear is in the White House, because of the fracture within the Democratic Party that we see playing out in demonstrations around the country. This morning, Columbia University announced it was canceling its general commencement ceremony because of the demonstrations. It's a catastrophe for the students. It's a demonstration of poor leadership, and it's evidence of the fear that I think permeates the Biden White House. Look, there are lots of things that could have happened that would have ameliorated the conditions of the refugees. The Gazans. Let me just make two observations. Number one, Egypt could have let Gazans cross into its border. That's what is certainly implied by the refugee protocols going back to the early 1950s. Yet Egypt has completely closed its border to Gazan refugees. I don't hear anybody complain about that. Number one. And number two, there's an easy answer here. Hamas could surrender. Yahya Sinwar could surrender. Nobody says, why doesn't Hamas surrender? But let me say it here. Why don't they surrender? Do you want to end the agony of the citizens of Gaza? Then let the aggressor who is on the verge of defeat surrender.
Right. I mean, America then has choices to make. You say that they're under domestic pressure and internally in the Democratic Party, and I want to come to that too. But can you conceive of the Democratic side, and as far as one can tell, withholding support from Israel? There've been reports of ammunition supplies being held up or stalled. I don't know if they're true. I don't know if you have any knowledge of that. But can you see that kind of material support being pulled away?
Well, I think it would be a terrible a mistake, both in foreign policy terms and in domestic political terms, if Biden did that. I've heard those reports about ammunition. I've also heard reports, which I can't verify, but trouble me, that the White House began to withhold intelligence sharing from Israel after the attack on the Quds Force officers in Damascus a few weeks ago. I think what the administration really wants is for this war to go away. That's why they want a ceasefire, and not just for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. They want it until the day after the election in November. I think Israel is being harmed by the delay. We just saw an attack by Hamas, which they took credit for, against what? Against the aid crossing into the Gaza Strip in northern Israel that killed 3 Israeli soldiers. So, you hear the complaints about aid not getting through. It's a complex subject. One reason they're not getting through is now Hamas is attacking the checkpoints.
You mentioned the student protests in America. There are already some signs of some mirror protests here in the UK as well. Could these protests lead to a significant impact on the coming American election? Could they bear on the minds of those inside the White House? Do you judge?
Well, I think it's possible. I hate to compare this to the 1960s when I was in college and the Vietnam War and so on, because America is not directly engaged in this war. American lives are not at stake. Nobody in America is going to get drafted to fight in the Gaza Strip. But you'll remember Norman Mailer's best-selling book about 1968 called Miami and the Siege of Chicago. Chicago, where the Democratic Convention was held in 1968, and where purely by chance it's being held again this summer. So, if the protesters really want to raise pain in their pursuit of their cause, and they do it at Chicago, I think it could have a very negative effect for the Democratic presidential ticket.
You think it could actually tip the election in a close race, this issue of Gaza?
Sure. Look, in a close, if you ask people what they think about Gaza today in the polls, it shows somewhere like 15th on the list of priorities.
Yeah.
Obviously, very different from 1968 in Vietnam. But if you ask, how do you feel about riots and chaos on American college campuses? People don't like it. And I think from the point of view of the even of the demonstrators on college campuses, they're being very short-sighted because I do think the chaos, the weakness of the American academic establishment, the weakness of the White House's response plays into Trump's hands. I am sorry to say because I don't want to see Trump win. I don't want to see Biden win either. This election is not going to end in a good result for the country.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because Donald Trump, unless I'm misreading this, his position on Gaza isn't especially clear. But at one moment, at one rally, he says he's solidly in support of Israel. At another, he says he wants to see a peace achieved. He even described Hezbollah as smart at one point. How do you read the Trump position?
Well, Trump has no position in any conventional meaning of that term. His only position is to be pro Donald Trump, and if he thinks it will advantage him politically, he'll move in whatever direction suits him. His main objective here, I think, is to diminish Biden. So whatever Biden does, Trump will criticize, however inconsistent that may be. And I think that's also an augury of what a Trump administration will look like, which is a near total policy chaos.
Just a word then on US politics. Over these last 48 hours, we've seen potential runners to be Donald Trump's running mate, vice president, in the Trump administration being pulled together. And one of them, to pick one at random, Senator Tim Scott, he refused to say that he would pledge support to the result of the coming presidential election, whatever it turned out to be. What did you make of that? Is it possible that the coming election could lead to unrest and even violence?
I think it's very unlikely that there will be violence. What bothers me is that responsible, at least previously responsible, political figures like Tim Scott now have to bend to Trump's most important qualification in picking his vice president, and that is, will you do what I tell you to do, and not have a contrary opinion like Mike Pence did on January the 6th, 2021.
Mm.
I think this is evidence of this obsession that Trump has with the 2020 election, why he won't let it go, and why that makes him vulnerable if only Biden weren't so unpopular.
I mean, no one can call the presidential election at this point, still several months out. But what is your instinct? If you had to guess, how do you feel it's going to go? Who will be the president after November?
Well, I'm worried it's going to be Trump, and because I think people don't fully understand how much the American people see that Biden is just not up to the job. I'm not being critical. A person's physical capacity is what it is, but they see Biden is not getting any better over the next 4 years either, and I think it's led us into a trap that 80% of the American people say they don't want, which is a rematch between Trump and Biden. And yet that is surely what we're going to get.
Ambassador, really good to talk to you as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.